Have you ever actually changed the metering mode on your camera? Or are you guilty of just ignoring it? Did you know that the choice you make can dramatically impact the look of your final image in certain situations? Hi, I'm Julie from Ultimate Photo Tips, and in today's video, I'm going to explain the different metering modes and show you how your selection can impact your final image. A camera uses its metering system to measure the light in a scene, and in automatic exposure modes, it uses those metering readings to calculate the shutter speed and aperture to give you a correct exposure. So let's go ahead and talk about the different metering modes you can choose from. So first of all, we have evaluative or matrix metering. And this is a reasonable choice for a default mode. In this mode, your camera averages the light across the entire scene to come up with a recommended exposure. However, your camera is calibrated to measure everything under the assumption that it reflects light like an object that has a luminance of middle gray. Since the world is actually full of objects that reflect light differently than middle gray, your camera can sometimes get the exposure wrong under this averaging metering mode. And that's why the next modes that I'm going to talk about can be so important. So next we have spot metering, and spot metering is for taking an exposure reading of a very small part of the scene. And the exposure is weighted at the very center of the frame. So you need to line up that spot that you want to meter with the center and then lock your exposure. Check your manual for how to do that, and then recompose if you need to take your photo. This spot metering mode is useful if you want to ensure that a particular spot in your photo is properly exposed. Now, partial metering is very similar to spot metering. It just uses a little more area around the center to take the exposure reading. Partial metering can be useful if the background is very bright relative to your subject, to prevent your subject from being rendered as a silhouette. Finally, some cameras offer center-weighted average metering. This is a bit like a cross between evaluative metering and partial metering. The exposure reading is biased toward the subject in the center of the frame, but also averaged across the entire scene. Okay, let's wrap up by looking at an actual example of the same subject that's shot with two different metering modes. In this example, I have a brightly lit subject against a shaded background. Here I've used evaluative or matrix metering to get an exposure that works to balance the highlights and shadows across the entire scene. You can still see detail in the background. This was taken in aperture priority mode at f5.6, and the camera selected a shutter speed of 1/80th of a second. In this photo, I've changed the metering mode to spot metering and metered off the flower. Because the flower is very bright, this metering mode has caused the background to go black. This was also taken in aperture priority mode at f5.6. This time, the camera selected a faster shutter speed of 250th of a second. The best way to learn how to use the different metering modes is through practice. So dust off your camera manual, learn how to change the metering mode and how to use exposure lock, and then try photographing the same subject using different modes to see the impact on your photo. You'll gain a whole new level of control over your images. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, please join me over on ultimatephototips.com and make sure to sign up for my newsletter while you're there. That's where I share ideas and inspiration that I don't share anywhere else. Happy shooting, and I'll see you next time.